Hello and welcome to the latest episode of MQ's Open Mind. And this week, Craig and I have a really important conversation we're going to have, actually looking at primarily young people, arguably, but really the role of online harms and online harms more broadly. So we're really looking at sexual exploitation. So we're delighted today. We've got Gemma Kelly, and Gemma is head of policy and public affairs at CEASE UK. And Gemma will tell us all about CEASE, what CEASE stands for, as will obviously become very obvious in a second, and maybe take us through. Really, I think we're living through a really important time as we try to get a better handle on sexual exploitation and really hopefully to protect as many people as possible from those harms. But also, I think looking at that more broadly, and not just in physical health outcomes, but also on mental health outcomes. And as we're a mental health podcast, that's, I suppose, a bit of the focus today, Gemma. So first of all, thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
You. Thanks for having me.
Welcome in.
And I think, Gemma, it's a Irish accent that I heard there. So you're from the south of Ireland, whereabouts?
Yeah, so I grew up in County Wicklow, so just below Dublin, and I moved to London in 2018. So I've been here about 6, 7 years.
Okay, great. Obviously, all the best people are Irish. Can we not say that? I don't
I
think we
think
can.
we can say
Craig, can
that.
we say that?
I don't think so because I'm not
We
part
can,
of this group.
oh, we can't say that, Craig. We can't say that. Okay. Some of the best people are Irish. Anyway, onto the serious business. Gemma, can you tell us a bit about? Obviously, you maybe before we get into your current role, but tell us a bit about your interest in mental health and maybe then how you got into the role you're in now.
Yeah, sure. So I have been interested in mental health for a very long time, I'd say, since I was in my early 20s. I think, like a lot of people that I know, a lot of people generally, I have struggled with my mental health, as I'm sure lots of people do. And I grew up in a time where it wasn't really talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was in my late teens, early 20s, nobody really spoke about mental health issues. We didn't really have the language for it. And I think that's really improved. So I have seen over the course of probably 20 years, now I'm giving away my age, how the ability to speak about mental health and to have open conversations is really taking place. And I think that's really good. And I wish it had been a little bit different when I was growing up, but I'm really glad to see that there were podcasts like this that are purely focused on mental health. And I just think it's really good, which is why I'm so happy to be here today.
Great. And so then tell us who CEASE is, how long you've been in existence, and then, but we'll go into detail of CEASE and what you do in a second, but just so everybody's clear, the organization, then we'll work backwards on how you got there.
Yeah, for sure. So CEASE is the Centre to End All Sexual Exploitation. It's quite the it's quite the mission statement that we have. We are a very small human rights charity based in the UK. We were started in 2018 by our founder and chair, Naomi Miles. It very much was an organic thing that Naomi set up. It was pretty much her at her kitchen table wanting to do something about the issue of sexual exploitation in the UK. And that's where CEASE was born, pretty much.
And so then how did you find your way into CEASE? What was your background before?
I initially worked in child protection. So I used to work in inner city Dublin in child protection. So we worked very closely with the social work department around trying to work with families so the children who were, I suppose, struggling with various different issues could remain in the home. So that was where I started. I then realized that actually, if we really want to change things for children and for society, we need to look at the structural reasons as to why people are in poverty, of why there is issues, of neglect or abuse. And so I moved into wanting to do more advocacy type work.
Yeah.
And I was very interested in the issue of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. A lot of the women that I used to work with would have been sexually exploited. And so I came to London actually to do a master's in human trafficking, migration, and organised crime.
Okay, right.
And then, as part of that, I went to an event that CEASE put on in 2019. And I thought, I really want to work for them. And so I followed their journey over the next couple of years. And then, just as we were coming out of the pandemic, I saw an advert for this role. I had worked in various other policy roles over my career and doing a lot of advocacy and lobbying work. So I applied for it and they let me join, which was very nice of them.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so then tell us then a bit about what CEAS does, like in terms of advocacy, your mission, and so on. So yeah, you've a very bold title of an organization. But
Yes.
on the ground, what does that actually involve?
Yes, it is. It's quite the mission statement that we have to end all sexual exploitation. So in reality, what we do is we try to dismantle the cultural and commercial forces that drive sexual exploitation. So we go to the root of the problem. So obviously, as we will speak today about young people's mental health and the impact of the online world on that, the impact of pornography, we focus on lobbying the government to bring in proper regulation and proper legislation that will actually curb the harms of these industries like porn industry or the tech industry. So we're very much focused on getting to the root causes of these issues and as well as trying to raise awareness of the harms that they cause as well.
And then in terms of the like you said, you're a small organization, and I mean that because it's such a big ask. And so I'm just trying to get sense in terms of that advocacy work. Then, so how do you well what maybe think about how that happens in every day and sort of some of the successes you've had?
Yes, so we are a small organization. I'm the only full-time staff member out of 7 people, and my role is working on policy. So one of the things that I worked on when I first joined CEAS is the Online Safety Act. So CEAS came together with some other organizations. We worked with Bernardo's and CARE, which is actually our colleague in CARE is based in the north of Ireland as well. And we formed a mini coalition, and that was very much focused on bringing in age verification for pornography into the Online Safety Act. The Online Safety Act was a huge piece of legislation that was going through Parliament. It's now finally gotten royal assent as of this time last year.
And just for those people who don't know about the Online Safety Act, it was like Online Safety Act 2023, and obviously its aim was to put legislation in place to keep the online environment safer, or maybe you can describe it better than.
Well, that pretty much is what the Online Safety Act was created to do. It was to bring regulation to the online space. So the internet, because the internet expanded so quickly and regulation and governments have not been able to keep up with it. So essentially, the internet is like the Wild West. Mm-hmm. No regulation. Tech companies have pretty much had free reign. So have pornography companies. They've been self-regulating, and that has been disastrous, as we can talk about later, for both children and adults alike. And so the Online Safety Act was something that the government brought in order to bring some kind of restraint and regulation into the online world. And part of that, which is some of the bit that we were interested in, is the issue of pornography and trying to bring regulation into the pornography industry in order to protect children.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe then staying on that topic then, obviously in terms of the Online Harms Act, that there is now that legislation now passed, as we say. But what's it actually say now about keeping young people safer in terms of pornography?
So one of the main things that we got out of the Online Safety Act, and that is now written into legislation, is that pornography sites and social media sites have to have what is called age verification on any of their sites. So at the moment, if I'm a 12-year-old child and I type in porn into Google or whatever, I will be brought probably most likely to Pornhub. And then a little box will come up and say, "Are you 18?" And I'll click that and say, "Yes, I am." And then I am onto the Pornhub site, which has millions and millions and millions of videos. And huge amount of those are sexually violent. And that obviously has had a devastating impact on children's mental and physical health. And so now, because of the Online Safety Act, when a 12-year-old goes on and Googles porn and tries to get onto Pornhub, they'll be stopped. And there'll have to be a way where they can provide enough information to prove that they are 18. And if the pornography sites aren't doing that, if they're not implementing that, then the government then can issue a fine, or they can use other measures that would disrupt their business. Mm-hmm. So that's a really, really big win for child protection.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. It really is. And in terms of the organisation, have we any sense of before that legislation came into play, of the impact? Do we know what the nature of the relationship is between exposure to pornography early on and mental health and other outcomes?
Yes, absolutely. There are decades of research on the impacts of mental health to both, children and adults. I suppose one thing that's good to probably point out a bit before we get into that is what pornography actually is.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people, you'll say pornography, they'll think, well, number one, they won't want to think about it at all for the most part. And then if they do, they'll think, oh, it's just two people taking their clothes off, having sex with a little bit of like music in the background, kind of 80s style. And one of the things we try to do at CEASE is to really explain that that is not what mainstream pornography is today. It's actually not the type of material that children are consuming. What children are consuming is sexual violence. So a couple of years ago, 2021, some academics, you might know them, Dr. Fiona Vera Gray and Claire McGlynn. Okay, so they did a piece of research and they analysed over 131,000 videos that are recommended to first-time users on the three biggest pornography sites. So that's Pornhub, Xvideos, and Xhamster. And they found that 1 in every 8 titles describe sexual activities that constitute sexual violence.
Oh my God.
And the definition that they used was the definition of sexual violence that the World Health Organization have used. So that's to first-time users.
Mm-hmm.
That's not even this is going to 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. Children are accessing pornography as young as 7, the average age being 13. The other thing they found was that the sexual activity between family members, so incest themed pornography, was the most frequent form of sexual violence that can be found on pornography sites today. It's huge.
Wow. When you said 13, you said average age of 13, what was that for?
So the average age that children start watching pornography is age 13.
13. Oh my God. That is really concerning. So hopefully now with the online harms bill, that the access is much more difficult.
Yes. So the actual bill itself is going to be implemented around March, springtime next year, 2025. But as soon as that comes in, yes, the hope is that a huge number of children will be prevented from accessing pornography, especially children who stumble across it, because a lot of children will.
Yeah.
And they might not necessarily go and look for it, but they will stumble across it really easily.
Yeah. There's a state in, believe it's Texas, that has done that has brought in age verification laws so that children don't have access.
Yeah, so there's several states in America that have done it, and Texas is one of them.
From their use of that age verification system, do you feel like that is the same system that you'd use over here or would want to use over here?
Yes, so there's various different ways that age verification can be done, and I won't even pretend to be a technical expert on the actual tech that does it. But Yoti is a really big age verification company, and they provide the tech already. It's already created in order for it to work and for it to be rolled out really quickly, really easily. So I think what's happened in some of the states in America is that when they have brought in age verification laws, like the ones in Louisiana, some of the pornography sites like Pornhub have said, well, then nobody can access it. So we're basically shutting ourselves off in Louisiana. And that was sort of their pushback to say, well, we don't agree with age verification. So now we're going to just turn off our service, which I'm fine with. So I'm not quite sure how they thought that was going to. I assume they thought people would be up in arms. But so far, age verification laws are coming in more and more states across the US and other countries as well.
That's what I was going to ask. What about other countries? So that's the UK, the United States,
France, Germany,
France.
and they're looking at age verification in Australia as well. They're rolling out a pilot moment in Australia, and there's various other ones as well that I can't quite remember, but they're the big ones that are leading the way. And there's also an EU-wide piece of legislation called the Digital Services Act, which is EU-wide.
And then, so then, do you like? Are there similar organisations to cease elsewhere, and are partnering with them?
Yes, so we are part of like an international think tank, it's called, and we work with organizations like CEAS from the US. So we work with NCOSE, which is the National Centre on Sexual Exploitation. We work with an organization called Collective Shout, which is based in Australia. And we work with a couple of organizations in Canada as well. So yeah, there are other organizations in other countries doing the same thing that CEAS are doing. So it's a global movement at the moment. People are really waking up to the issue of pornography and the harm that it is causing. And there's a lot happening in this space, more so than there was 5, 6, 7 years ago.
And what do you think has led to that sort of sea change? And now there's greater focus. Is there like a see me type moment?
I think there's probably been a couple of things. So in the UK, I think the Sarah Everard case,
yeah,
really important turning point. And
so just for those who don't know that case, remind us of the case. She was murdered by a police officer.
Murdered by a
serving police officer as well, wasn't it?
Police officer. It was in and around the time of COVID, and he used his credentials as a police officer to say that she had broken some COVID rules, I think, and essentially got her into his car and raped her.
Yeah.
Absolutely horrific. It's just horrific. She's young, in her early 30s, I think. And it came out shortly after that he had been watching hardcore pornography as well. And, obviously some of the violent acts that we see in pornography, we are seeing being acted out on girls. And that was the case for Sarah as well. So I think that was a turning point. I think that's when people started to really go, okay, we have a really big issue with violence against women and girls. We've got to start figuring out what is driving it. And I think the Children's Commissioner has done amazing research with young people and actually asked them how pornography is affecting them. And so the stories from kids themselves, I think, are turning the tide a little bit, because they're saying, this is really affecting us. We're genuinely scared and terrified by what we are seeing in pornography. It is our sex education, and we know that it's not healthy and it's not right. So that's also something I think that has made a difference, is that we are now looking at it from a child protection angle, and that's really, really important. So we're able to have these discussions now. And I think that is really thanks to campaigning organizations over the last couple of years that have worked on things like the online safety bill, and who've been raising their concerns, and particularly parliamentarians as well.
But just even think more broadly, but obviously, I think I said earlier, the Me Too campaign, obviously, in terms of violence against women and girls in general. And obviously, I'm just thinking also when you mentioned parliamentarians of Jess Phillips, Labour MP, every year stands up and reads out the names of all those women who've lost their lives through violence at the hands of men.
Yeah.
And then, so in terms of your organisation, then how are you funded? How do you make your pay the bills and ensure you're able to do this really vitally important work?
Yeah, it's tricky. Paying the bills is always tricky in a small organisation. We have some really, really good individual funders, just some really kind, generous, caring people who are really motivated about the work that we do, and that's where our funding comes from. If we didn't have them, we wouldn't exist, essentially.
you pay for or fund research itself, or do you do your own research?
At the moment, we do a lot of sort of desk-based research. So we do a lot, we go through all of the current research that's being done on the issue. I mean, there's so much research that is being done that is really good. And we have 40 years of research that we can use and draw from. But we do want to do more research. That is something that we want to do. We want to be able to commission research. So one of the things that we are hoping to do, again, it's all funding dependent, would be to do a piece of research on OnlyFans.
Oh yeah.
OnlyFans, for people who don't know what OnlyFans is a platform. They call themselves a social media site. I think personally that's a little bit of a stretch, but it is where people can sell sexualized content, and we are extremely worried about the impact that has on obviously normalizing objectification, hypersexualization, but also exploitation and sex trafficking. So we would really like to get some funding so we can do a piece of research around the exploitation and human trafficking that's happening on OnlyFans at the moment.
Obviously, I don't want to go into details, but obviously the Tate chap, obviously Andrew Tate, obviously is not one of the things he's been accused of human trafficking in that regard. Well, I don't know the details, but certainly in the news. Have we a sense? So just in your being obviously immersed in this area, is the online trafficking, is that on the increase, and has that been facilitated by sites like, we think, obviously those online sites?
Yes. So it's always really difficult to get reliable data on something like trafficking because it's a hidden crime, right? It's really difficult to find out what the exact stats are. But what we do know is sites like OnlyFans are certainly a gateway for that. They make it very easy for particularly pimps and traffickers to sell women, to sell their content online. And the other thing we know is that, when I talk about that violence that's happening on pornography sites, that sexual violence, all of that violence is real. So it's not acted, it's not performed. That is happening to very real women and very real girls. And we know that there is a huge amount of trafficking and exploitation within that industry itself. Particularly young women who are coming from, impoverished backgrounds, who have suffered child sexual abuse as children themselves, who have experienced homelessness, particularly children and young women who've grown up in care. These are all on-ramps into sexual exploitation. And so many of those women are being exploited and being trafficked into that industry. And so we know that is a hub of human trafficking. So it isn't just the harm that watching this material is doing to people who watch it. It's also harm to the women and girls and the men who are actually involved in that industry as well.
Yeah. Just harms all around, really, isn't it? I know, as a sort of slight aside, but that we're recording this, I think, a week after the appalling case of that despicable person in Northern Ireland.
Oh,
who obviously was done for, I think, manslaughter and I think a host of other charges, but a range of blackmail offences, but sadly, devastatingly included the suicide of a 12-year-old girl. And again, I can only imagine that's the tip of the iceberg.
It is the tip of the iceberg. So what we're seeing at the moment is a huge increase in sextortion, which is what this man was doing. Man, he was 22, I think.
Yeah.
Young. But what we are seeing is children are being targeted via social media. So they're being targeted on Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, etc., by predators who, like this man, will trick them into taking explicit photographs of themselves. And then they'll say, well, if you don't send me more, I'm going to send it to your parents. I'm going to send this to your school. All your friends are going to see it. And then they get into this horrific just cycle of abuse and exploitation. And yeah, it has resulted in some really horrifying cases like that one. There's another case in the United States, and the son in this particular case said goodnight to his parents. He went to bed. This started, he got a text message. This person elicited photographs and videos from him, then started putting pressure on him. If you don't give me money, I'm going to release this to your school, etc. And within 2 hours from start to finish, he had taken his own life.
I mean, sadly, given the work that I do in suicide, and although these are statistically rare events, every one of them is an absolutely devastating tragedy. And I think if the online harms bill in the UK can really help make the internet a safer space, because in so many of these cases, as
a young woman, sorry, not a young woman.
So maybe then the question, I suppose, next is we've got the online harms bill in the UK, which is fantastic as a really important step forward. What else should we be doing? What else should governments be doing, or other organisations, to try and better regulate, I don't know, all of these harms? Yeah, the pornography on one level, but the harms more broadly.
There's a couple of things I think that they can do. Certainly, there's a couple of things that government can do, and we have some very strong, straightforward asks for government that really builds on the Online Safety Act. I would say the first thing that needs to happen with the Online Safety Act, I think actually there's lots of things that could be done to strengthen it, particularly around social media and other types of harms, as well as pornography. But what's really going to be important is how it's implemented. And at the moment, that's kind of one of the big things that we focus on is trying to encourage the regulator, which is Ofcom, to make sure that they're really implementing age verification for pornography really strongly. And we are trying to also make that case to government, because the government will then have to hold the regulator to account. And then the other thing that we are speaking about at the moment to anybody who will listen to us in government is there is a very strange loophole in the law at the moment whereby material and content that is illegal or prohibited in the offline world is not on the online world.
Oh, I didn't know that. Right.
Yes. So that content I spoke about earlier, the sort of incest themed content, some of the very sexually violent content, that is regulated by the BBFC, the British Board of Film Classification, in the
of course.
So you can't get that. You can't go into a sex shop and buy that on a video, a DVD, a Blu-ray, whatever it happens to be. But you can go on any pornography site that you can think of, and it's awash with that type of material. So we don't have the same regulatory framework for offline and online content. And given that we know the pornography is mostly consumed online, this is where we need to have really strict regulation on that type of content. Because one of the other things that is happening with that type of, particularly what we call barely legal content, which is women who are probably 18, 19 are dressed up as children in porn videos, and that is driving the sexualization of children, and therefore is driving child sexual abuse, child sexual exploitation, and that is not illegal online in this country. So that is something that needs to be changed, because that is having devastating consequences.
And was there attempts to have that in the online harms bill, and it was rejected? Is that what happened?
Yes. So we had about 5-6 different things that we were asking for under the Online Safety Act when we were going through that parliamentary process. One of them was age verification. One of them was age verification for social media sites when it comes to pornography, as well as pornography sites. One of them was age and consent checks for people who are actually appearing in pornographic content. And then the other one was to close that loophole between online and offline content. So we were successful on the first one, which we were very happy about. But there are those other things that need to happen as well. So as a result of the campaigning work that we did, and many other organizations and very really good committed parliamentarians, the government at the time announced that they would do an independent review into pornography regulation in the UK. And so this is now the mechanism that we are using to try to push for those extra pieces of work that need to be done to protect people. And we're really hopeful that that review is going to make really good recommendations that the government will then take on board, and that one of those will cover those other things that we asked for in the bill and that we didn't necessarily get.
And what's the timeline? Do we know what the timeline for that is, Gemma?
Well, the timeline is changing. It was supposed to have reported in the summer, but then we had a general election.
Yeah.
Everything went on hold. But we are now hopeful that the actual review team will finish their report, because they had hundreds and hundreds of submissions that charities and individuals and organizations had sent in. But they are hopeful that they will have that report finished to probably by the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And then I don't know when the government will then release it. That will be obviously up to them, but hopefully early next year.
Okay, well, fingers crossed for that. Fingers crossed for that. So then I'm just thinking then more, if we go back to this idea that obviously we're a research podcast as well. And so then if somebody gave you all the money in the world, like what do you think of the sort of really key questions in terms of research questions that we need to address in this broader field? And just to say that MQ, we recently published a report in which we, working with partners, looked at the online harms and obviously more broadly the relationship between social media use and mental health. It's a complicated relationship, there's without doubt, and there's too often is it reduced to a very simple relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that's what certainly comes out of the report is there are lots of, not looking at pornography more specifically, but just looking at the social media use in general and mental health. There's so many unanswered questions, and often what we think are straightforward facts aren't yet facts because we haven't done the research. So I suppose in the pornography or the world that you work in CESE, mm-hmm. what would you see as the sort of the key questions?
So one of the things that we are thinking about at the moment that we, like you said, if we had all the money in the world that we would like to do, is we would like to do a cost-benefit analysis. So I think social media is relatively new, right? And so I can only imagine the complications of researching its impact on young people and everything that entails, like the research that you guys have just done. We, in my world, I suppose, when we work on pornography, while online pornography is new, it's probably 20 years old, we also have previous research even before that. So we have 40 years of research that documents the harms of pornography to people. What we would really like to see is how can we, because so much of when we try to make our argument about how harmful pornography is, some of the pushback, not always stated, is that it's actually going to cost money to fix the problem, right? It's going to cost. Same with social media. Does any government really want to upset a tech industry or a pornography industry? Business is really important. Economics is really important. So we have come to the conclusion that we need to make a really strong economic argument mm-hmm. for regulating pornography. And so if I had all the money in the world, I would look at how much it is costing a government to address the harms of pornography. Because the harms of pornography are widespread and it affects everybody. So we know that pornography is driving violence against women and girls. We know that frontline services are overrun with just the sheer volume of violence against women and girls that they actually can't cope with. We work with a practitioner in Devon and Cornwall, and she works in the sexual assault referral clinic. And she said she's worked in this line of work for probably about 30 years. She has never seen the level of violence against women and girls that she's seeing at the moment.
Horrendous.
Yeah, it's horrendous. They're overrun. And then there's increase in child-on-child sexual abuse. So children are now committing half of all child sexual abuse. So it's peer on peer. So that's a huge issue. We know that pornography is filling the gap with the lack of relationship and sex education in school. So children are getting sex education from pornography, not from good, sound sources. Yeah. And then there's the mental health impacts. Rates of addiction to pornography are soaring for young people and adults. So essentially, preventing this and dealing with how it is playing out in real people's lives and providing all of the services to cope with this is costing the government money.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
what you want to do is go, well, yes, we understand that there is an economy that you guys manage. We've all had a terrible couple of years. We understand, but actually, you're kind of in false economies here because the money that the government is paying out to cope with all of these things, policing, education, health, maybe if we stopped the flow of this really devastatingly harmful sexual violence being streamed into people's pockets, some of these things would get easier and you
Yeah.
would save money. So we don't like having to bring things down to the brass tacks of money and how much can be saved, because what we want to do is just not have this horrific material so easily available. But if we had all the money in the world, we would do that cost benefit analysis. And I would be able to go to government and say, look, here's what we can save. Here's what you can save. This is going to make your job easier. And it's going to also impact millions and millions of children who are consuming content and who are being abused and harassed, and boys who are being groomed to commit sexual violence from age 12. These are all the things that we could solve.
Yeah, but Jim, I wouldn't be apologetic about using the economic argument, and because that's what moves levers, the policy levers and the political levers, and indeed in the suicide prevention field, although it is really difficult to do that, we use that as one of our levers. Of course, you're trying to, as you're doing as well, try to prevent distress across the world and pain and suffering and unbearable challenges. But economically, we also know that suicides, for example, cost economically on average, we're thought to cost about every death by suicide on average about £1.5 million. Right. So that and although you don't want to, as you say, reduce things down to the brass tacks of money, if it helps me get more funding from governments for services, for research, for policy, we should be using all resources.
Sorry, just to highlight a point that was in the report, one of the recommendations is that tech companies, whilst they're building these websites or these apps, is to actually have safeguards put in from the get-go, as opposed to doing this retroactively, which would be which would actually help moving forward in terms of like how much money is being spent trying to fix a problem, when really and truly this should be done from the beginning.
Absolutely. That's exactly it. There should be safety by design. So we know, particularly with social media companies, that, and porn sites as well, that it is never, safety is not their first priority. Their first priority is to make money. If their first priority was safety, then the tech companies, we wouldn't have all these issues with eating disorder material being pushed on Instagram. We wouldn't have algorithms pushing children onto pornography sites. If pornography sites actually was putting safety before everything else, we wouldn't have sexually violent material, because they wouldn't do it. But essentially, look, it is about money, right? At the end of the day, it does come down to money for them too. And so they are not going to do the thing that protects people. We just are about to release a report, and we've called it profits before people, because that's what the porn industry does. It puts profits before people, and so does the social media. But they can do it if they want to do it. If the will was there, they could do it.
Yeah, you have to focus on the commercial determinants. It's so important.
Yeah.
On that note, then, we're coming almost to the end of our time, Gemma, with this. So is there anything else you would like to, before I have two last unrelated questions, but we try and end on something different from the heaviness of the topic. But before I do, is there anything you were hoping that we would ask you, or a message you would like to convey about CEASE? You don't have to have that we haven't asked about.
So it's a good question. I think, one of the things that we try to do at CEASE, we work very much at the government level. We really want to see good regulation. We want to see the government make really good decisions. But I think there is also a lot to be said just about providing a space within families or schools or youth groups for children and young people to be able to talk about these issues.
Mm-hmm.
And while, obviously we will do what we can do, right? Like we're going to keep going and we're going to keep lobbying the government and we're going to continue to be very annoying and to keep bringing up all of these issues, but just on a very basic, community level, we also would just love if people would start to have these conversations
Mm-hmm.
and to have these conversations with their children, whether they're their caregivers or nieces or nephews or whoever it is. I just think that's really important. And sometimes we don't want to put all the onus on parents and caregivers, right? That's not what this is, because it shouldn't be up to them to protect their children from every single online danger. It's impossible. It's an impossible task. But to be able to create an environment where children can freely speak about these issues, I think is really important. The feedback we have gotten, we did some polling at the end of last year, beginning of this year, around people's attitudes towards pornography. And the demographic that came back really strongly around regulating online pornography was Gen Z. Gen Z girls who were literally saying, please protect us. We are trying to protect our little sisters and brothers because we have lived through this and we don't want to see brothers and sisters have to do the same thing. But we can't do it by ourselves. Like, you have to help us. And I think that was just a really important message that I think people need to hear, because we have failed them. And I don't want to be having this conversation in 10 years or 5.
Such an important message there, and hopefully, if we had this conversation in 10 years' time, that progress, we will have made that progress that you cease, and many of all of us out there are obviously looking for. Okay, so just to try and bring it all to a close, Gemma. The first question is sort of a wee bit related and to what you do in your job, and then the second is completely unrelated. So here goes. So that first one is, in terms of thinking about your future, your organization's future, or your future, whatever way you want to interpret this, Gemma, 5 words. Can you think of 5 words when you think about what I would like to see in the future, in my future, or your future?
You'd think I'd have a really good answer for this.
It's a difficult question. It's a difficult question.
It's a difficult question. It's a good question. It is a good question. I don't want to repeat what I just said, but actually, do you know what I want to do, Rory?
What?
I want to retire.
Retire?
Yes, I want to retire, and I want to run a bookshop with a little cafe inside it so I can read books and drink coffee all day. I can't do that until we have ended sexual exploitation. And so when I said I don't want to be having this conversation in 10 years, I really don't want to be having this conversation in 10 years. This is not 5 words, because I can't do anything in 5 words.
That's good. I like that. That's a good answer. Really good answer. Yeah.
But I don't want to. I want to retire. I want to know that we've done it, and that my 8 and 10-year-old nephews don't have to face the world that they are facing.
Great, great. Okay, very last question, then we'll leave it there. So again, we've been in a bit reflective mode. What advice would you give your 16-year-old self?
So much advice.
Well, okay, just one piece of advice, because there can be lots. You're right.
The one piece of advice that I would give my 16-year-old self is to ask for help.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the situation is, whether you are struggling with your mental health, whether it's with relationships, whether it's with, drugs and alcohol, whatever it happens to be, I would just say ask for help. Because I think the world that I grew up in, we weren't allowed to ask for help, and we weren't allowed to say that we struggle.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's gotten a little bit easier, at least I hope it does, but certainly in the world, we weren't allowed to do that.
Yeah, that's such a powerful one to end on, and a really optimistic one as well. And I think you're right, obviously, in the 80s and 90s in Ireland, I think still, and not just in Ireland, obviously across these islands, I think asking for help wasn't the norm. And so I think the good news is that's been one positive change in the intervening 20 odd years of we now live in a world where that is more acceptable, but we still have a long way to go. We do. On that note, Gemma, a huge thanks from Craig and I. A really fascinating conversation and really, really important work. And the best of luck as you continue on this fight to obviously end the world for sexual exploitation. It's really, really important. So thanks so much for what you do and what your organization does.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for having us. We really, really, really appreciate it. So thank you.